let's talk a little bit about your sending infrastructure. So your sending infrastructure is basically the below the surface elements that really help you define yourself as an email sender. And depending on the decisions you make with your sending infrastructure, that can have some fairly big consequences in terms of how the receiving inboxes perceive you as a sender and give you a better or worse chance of actually getting your emails delivered into the inboxes of your subscribers. So at the infrastructure level, there are a few things and considerations to think about. One is, of course, making sure all of your records are authenticated, your SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records. Two is you want to make decisions around your sending IP address or IP addresses. And three, you also want to make decisions around your sending domains and subdomains. Let's go through each one of these. Number one, with your SPF, your DKIM, and your DMARC records, we have several other videos going specifically in depth into each one of those. The basic idea is you just want to make sure that they are all set up properly so you're able to get your emails when you send them to be authenticated properly. And that will give you a baseline of being able to start getting through the filters and the layers of filters to get your emails through properly. The second thing I mentioned, which is your IP address. You're sending IP address or IP addresses. This is a decision that you need to make at the core of which IP addresses you're sending from. And also for the average sender, the decision really lies in deciding whether you use a shared IP pool or a dedicated IP address. So when you're signing up for many of these third-party email platforms, oftentimes by default, what they do is they assign you to a pool of email addresses that are shared, hence shared IPs, with many other senders. So whenever you send out an email, that email message will utilize one or multiple of the IP addresses that other senders within that company's customer base are also using. Now, considerations around that is, if you don't send high volume, you're able to get probably some benefits from the fact that all the volume is pulled together from the other senders as well as yourself, which is why many of the platforms will utilize this as a default method. But the downside is you have less control over your reputation because someone else could be doing something poor and sending through those IP addresses. Whereas even if you yourself have good sending practices, the negative influence by the bad sending practices of people you share with can influence your deliverability. So then on the other hand, there's a decision to be made whether or not you want to go for a dedicated IP address, which most platforms will have a procedure to allow you to do that. A dedicated IP address, on the other hand, compared to a shared pool of IP addresses, is a single or sometimes several, but basically a single IP address that only you use to send your emails. So in that case, you have full control over your sending practices. And when you send mail, it reflects back to this IP address, and which is only associated with you. So you have just better control overall. The downside is if you don't send enough volume and you don't send consistently enough, it may actually be hurtful because you aren't able to build up a proper reputation with the inbox providers because your volume is too low. And so overall, it could hurt your deliverability in that sense. Now, if you know what you're doing, if you follow best practices, and if you have high enough consistent volume, then a dedicated IP address is almost certainly the way to go because you have the most control over it. Then the third point I want to talk about is the infrastructure around your sending domains. So your root domain is probably what you think of. So your basic business domain. That's probably what you think of when you're sending your emails. Maybe you have all of your emails configured to send it from there. However, a lot of times it's a better strategy to have some partitions of subdomains and utilize them for particular emails. For example, for your marketing emails, you could have something like send dot your root domain. And for your transactional emails, you can have something like, I don't know, mail dot. It's arbitrary what you choose to name it. But the core idea there is you isolate the domain reputation for each one of those types of emails so that they don't cross-pollute. The idea is that, for example, if you send your marketing emails and they could potentially be shaky in terms of engagement and reputation, those are isolated to only apply to your marketing emails under the marketing subdomain versus carrying over and have negative effects to your core transactional emails or your business emails to investors and customers, etc. So those are probably the three major infrastructure considerations when you're thinking about your sender infrastructure and how to optimize it and improve it so that you have the best chance and the solid foundation for getting your emails delivered into the inbox and improving your email deliverability.